Next from Springfield, former judge and former colonel in the Illinois National Guard Ronald Spears speaks at a dinner hosted by the Profession of Leadership Foundation, honoring their military and first responder colleagues. This runs about 30 minutes.
Well, Illinois has a long and distinguished record of lawyers serving in the armed forces and also in the emergency services, fire, police, emergency medical folks. You know, it went back, for example, to Abraham Lincoln, who served in the Illinois militia. He was in New Salem at the time, and he joined the militia in the Black Hawk Indian War. And one of the greatest days of his life, he said, was when he was elected captain over in Beardstown of his militia unit. Now, he only served for a couple of months total, and he did joke about it later that he had numerous bloody encounters with mosquitoes. But he always cherished his time because of the leadership that he was able to gain by leading those people during that period. He also met John Todd Stewart, who was in his battalion. John Todd Stewart became a friend of his in the legislature in Vandalia, and he encouraged Lincoln that he had the ability to be a lawyer. He loaned him his law books, and he was his first law partner in Springfield. So there was some connection even then of Lincoln and how he became a lawyer. Being a lawyer in many different ways in the services is an important thing. I would say to you that an example is my father-in-law was a combat veteran in World War II. Through the Pacific, you know, one combat mission after another. My granddaughter, Meredith, saw his old uniforms and saw that his branch insignia for the infantry were crossed rifles. She saw that Grandpa Ronnie's branch insignia for the Judge Advocate General Corps was a sword, a gold sword, crossed by a quill pen. And so she asked me what I did, and she was a little worried because she'd seen this like a war movie on TV and was kind of nervous about guns and so forth. I said, well, Papa Don protected America by using a rifle. And Grandpa Ronnie protected America by using a pen and a book. And she thought that was really good. She was relieved, and maybe if she saw me shoot, she'd be even more relieved. So we've served in a number of different ways. What I didn't tell Meredith, though, is that in today's world, no matter what you do in the military, you're at risk, whether you have a position that's in support or whether you have a position that's in combat. And the story that it brings to mind is by one of the people on your list tonight, but he's not here. In 2004, my JAGs were starting to be deployed overseas. Joe went overseas. Just about all the JAGs went overseas to either Iraq or to Iran. And it was really kind of a scary time, and they would only take people of certain rank. And so it got down to the point where we were going to have to send a major for a deployment. And so I volunteered that I would go. I was a full colonel at the time. I knew there'd have to be a waiver through the Pentagon and so forth. And so it came back that the waiver was not granted. They couldn't send somebody of my rank to go for this assignment. They were going to send a major. So they sent John Childress. John is a lawyer from Springfield who was with the U.S. Attorney's Office at the time. Had two lovely young boys and a wife, and how crushing it was to watch all of my JAGs be deployed and the stress on their families and so forth. And it was about a one-year assignment. And about halfway through that assignment, I got word that John had been on a convoy on a mission in Iraq, and a roadside bomb had exploded, overturning the vehicle that he was in, causing him some serious injuries. And he was later lauded because his first attention was to get support in and to make sure that there wasn't any other aggressive attack at the time and to make sure his people were protected. But he suffered some serious injuries, for which John was awarded not only a Purple Heart, but a Bronze Star. When John came back to town, he was an associate judge for a while. He's back with the U.S. Attorney's Office, which has always been his love. But as I reflected on it, I was thinking, you know, John was a lot younger, a lot stronger, a lot more physically fit than I was at the time of that duty. And if I had been in that vehicle, that might have been the last chapter. You might have been hearing Joe tonight here. But that's the way it is, the randomness of the military. And you never know what exactly is going to happen, when it's going to happen, what assignments you're going to have that could really bring it to a close. So Patriots Day was September 11th. I don't know if you knew that Congress had designated September 11th every year as Patriots Day. Patriot is probably one of the most misunderstood term that there is. If you think back of the time of the Revolution, what a patriot was, we usually think of now as a loyalist, somebody that's, all the government, anything the government wants to do, but that's not a patriot. A patriot is one that holds the government accountable, that if there's a wrong, they want it to be corrected, and they will resist if there's wrongdoing. So what we need today, it seems to me, to honor, not just to say thank you. That's the thing that you hear. That's what these service members hear. Thank you for your service. And so what I want to talk about just a little bit tonight is how maybe we need to go a little beyond that and what I call thinking patriotism. Not just the rah-rah, waving the red, white, and blue, and that's important. That's what everyone needs. But what they also need is a deeper understanding of the military service in our country, of what it consists of, what it needs, what we can do as lawyers, as communicators to the public about those needs. Because if you look at the numbers, it's hard to get a head count. If you want to go out today and say, how many are in the military? Well, let's say somewhere around 2 million. That's the active and reserve component. How many firefighters? Well, maybe there's 1 million or so firefighters of active and volunteers. How many police? How many sworn officers? Well, maybe 900,000, and then do we include other correctional officers? Do we include others? How many EMTs? Maybe 250,000. If you throw in 130,000 licensed attorneys as defenders of freedom as well, and I think we're all defenders of freedom, you still won't have 2% of the population. So the issue becomes, how does the 2% of the population get the understanding and the support and the care and the proper concern of the 98%? Now we know, those of us in here that are a little older, know how fast public opinion can swing on these things. We can remember soldiers getting spit on in airports during Vietnam. And we can remember after 9/11, and since that time, that they're treated properly as heroes. And that we've finally disconnected in our head the people that give the orders for them to go and where they have to go and what they have to do when they get there. The same with police officers were treated differently after the Chicago Democratic Convention than they were treated after 9/11. We know how fast the mood can swing on those sort of things. So how can we properly get them to understand? And when I mean understand things, we've had a volunteer army for the last 40 years. Every year we have to recruit 17 to 24-year-olds. We have to get about 150,000 of them. Did you know that about 75% of the people in that age group, 17 to 24, are not qualified to enter the military through a combination of factors that include they don't have a high school degree or a GED, or they can't pass the admission test, the ASVAB, which is the admission test to the military, or they have a serious criminal record, either misdemeanor or felony criminal record that's disqualifying, or they have physical problems or obese and they can't meet any kind of fitness standards to be able to enter the military. So that gets us down to 25%. We are now in a technological fight for our lives in terms of military. It's about who can leverage technology to gain an advantage on the battlefield, where you're going to be competing for the greatest minds. If you want something that's kind of scary, go on ESPN and watch the National Drone Competition. Anybody seen this? This is unbelievable. They have these young people, they're doing drones, and they're in all sorts of trick competitions, and the way that they can work with these drones is unbelievable. So just for a moment, imagine that you put a camera or a weapon on that drone. And imagine the many issues that are going to come up, legal issues, protection issues, all the other kind of issues that we're going to be dealing with. My point is, we're going to need the best and the brightest of our young people to help fight that fight. And the sad reality is that of the 25% that are qualified, after 15 years of war, most parents are somewhat hesitant to want to encourage their child to be in. But it isn't just somebody else's job to do. That's part of the message and part of the problem and concern. The other thing is that we have to make a national security issue out of good education for our young people, making sure that they get some guidance so that we can reduce some of this criminal record, encourage fitness and nutrition. Those are national security issues for all of our young people. The second thing that I'd say about the military that I want people to understand is how in the battle for civil rights, every discriminated group has fought to get in the fight. Because if you think about it, people have recognized that if someone is willing to fight and die for me, they should have full and complete citizenship, full and complete rights. So if you look, in fact, get back to my guy, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln probably died because of that issue. Because in the last speech that he gave, which was just a few days before his death from the second floor of the White House, the speech that he gave said that during Reconstruction, one of the things that we need to do is to consider suffrage for the African American soldiers that had fought. Booth was there and was quoted as having said, he's for blank suffrage. That's the last speech he's going to give. I'm going to run him through. And that was the night that the kidnapping of the president turned to the assassination attempt on the president of the United States. But since that time, look at what has happened. And I'm happy to say, as part of the Army, that all those barriers have finally been breached. It's been a long, hard struggle. It was not an easy struggle. But women, if you want to be combat soldiers, I have a recruiter out in the hallway. Good news. And we've broken down the barriers of race, of sex, and of sexual orientation. So the military is now open for all, and we welcome and need the support of all. Some things that I want to consider as lawyers that can help is the last thought of a police officer or of a soldier or someone in the military I don't want to be is, I wonder what the lawyers will think of this. And that is happening on the battlefield, and it's happening in our police departments. And what do I mean by that? I mean that those are two areas where deadly force is authorized and where split-second decisions have to be made. I was talking with one of the security officers here tonight, and I said, you know what I wanted to do? I don't own weapons myself, but my father-in-law just passed away a few months ago, and he had all kinds of weapons, a World War II combat veteran. One of the weapons that he had was a pellet gun that he used on the farm to get the critters out of the garden, and that pellet gun looked exactly like an Army 45. Same weight, metal. You could not tell unless you were in bright light very close to it and saw the bore was smaller because it fired a pellet rather than a bullet. And so what I was planning on doing, and some of you know my devilish side knows that I really wanted to do this, I was going to bring it and I was going to have it here under the thing, and then I was just going to hold it up. Okay? Now, that was going to accomplish several things. A couple of them good, a couple of them not so good. A couple of good things that would have accomplished is that would have forced you in that rapid cognition mode. In rapid cognition, these are the decisions that we have to make in just a matter of a few seconds, 2 or 3 seconds. What the research is showing us now is that this isn't done consciously. It's done all through our subconscious. It's the result of all the experiences that we've had. And if you have grandchildren or if you still have young children, you've played the matching game. And so what's going on in our brain is an instantaneous matching game, where what we're seeing is being matched with all the things that we've ever experienced in our life, all of our attitudes, beliefs, and all that thing, and then an impulse is coming out through our brain that we react upon. We call it intuition, we call it whatever, but it isn't a conscious, deliberative decision on, well, gee, I wonder. And when I say I don't want them having their last thought being, what will the lawyers think, is that all of these acts are micromanaged after the fact. I mean, something that happened in 2 seconds results in years worth of study. I don't know how many lawyers would be involved in all of these things. It's even shown in the movies sometimes. If you watched American Sniper, if you watch the very opening scene of American Sniper, he's on the roof, he's got his spotter, he's looking out and he sees a young child approaching the American troops. And he sees a handoff between the young child and the child's mother, and he thinks it was a bomb, but he's not sure. And so his buddy's asking him, you know, are you cleared to shoot? Are you cleared to shoot? And he makes some comment, kind of like, you know, I'm going to have to make the call, and the JAGs are going to have to figure it out. Okay? Because these guys are getting court-martialed if they're wrong. if somebody up there had a video camera and wants to take the picture and put it on Al Jazeera, the next week they may be before a board trying to decide if they had just cause to use deadly force in a military combat situation. Now bring that forward to the police officer on the street and the decisions they have to make. Now, understand that there are no excuses to be made. I've been in several of these professions. We have bad lawyers that need to be out of our profession. And we see every couple of months our Supreme Court has to put some of them out of our profession. But the sad thing is they've caused a lot of harm. You look at the number of the program that have to compensate, the lawyers' compensation program that goes along with ARDC as to how much money they pay out every year, how much harm is done to people before we finally get them out. And that's the same in all these professions. But what I want you to do is to be a thinking patriot. And maybe one way of being a thinking patriot is to look at some of the research that's coming out on this rapid cognition. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Blink that I recommend to you. What he's talking about are these 2-second decisions that you have to make, and what everything happens through your cognition that would lead you to be able to make a decision. Some of it good, some of it bad. He calls it thin slicing. As that matching game is through your brain, it only has 2 seconds, so it's not really able to fix on all those things. So it takes a thin slice off of all those experiences and pieces it together in your brain to make a decision. And if I'd pulled that gun up, you would have done something. And what you would have done would be based on all of your experiences in life. Some of you would have ducked down under the table. Some of you would have thought, oh, it's just Spears, you know, I'm surprised you didn't bring a cannon. Some of you would have done, you know, other things, but you would have done something. You would have thought something right at that moment that would reveal a lot about you. My father-in-law used to say in combat, you never know how you're going to react until the first shot is fired. That some of the people that came in and thought they were Rambo were curled up on the ground in the foxhole when the first shot ran out, and others that seemed rather meek were able to perform admirably under fire. Read Dan Simon's book, The Invisible Gorilla. Most of you have seen that video, and I'm going to tell you about it, but it's not going to give it away because he's done a lot of others that even if you look at it now, you won't get it. So what it is, it's a video. You can go online and read and do it. It'd be fun. You ought to look at it tonight when you get home. And so what it is he says, okay, there's going to be 2 teams. There's going to be a team in white shirts and black shirts. And they're going to be throwing basketballs back and forth to each other, to their own team. And you're to count how many times the white team exchanged the basketball. And at the end, I'm going to quiz you, and it's very important that you pay close attention to this. And so they do, and so you watch, and then at the end he says, well, how many times did the white team change the basketball? And most people say, well, you know, this number. And he says, yeah, that's good. And he goes, oh, that's very good. How many of you saw the gorilla? And at least 50% of the people go, what? And he shows it back in slow motion, and the gorilla walks across, all the way across, stops, beats his chest, and then proceeds on across the stage. Okay? Now, I'm not just talking about 50% of lay people. I'm talking about 50% of the judges in new judges school. Okay? And what Simmons, his research is about is when we fix on one object, we don't see many other objects. And we don't see the same things. We're not seeing the same thing as we're sitting here tonight. Different things are entering our mind, different recollections, different memories. He was also on this team that wrote a very excellent report on eyewitness identification, that as lawyers that are going to be ever having witnesses on the stand, or as judges who are ever going to be trying to evaluate witnesses, should read the entire report. It's on his website on eyewitness identification. And the third thing is the studies that are going on about implicit bias. The American Bar Association, the Illinois State Bar Association are focusing on this idea of implicit bias. There's a website that Harvard has called Project Implicit. You can go on there tonight and you can take your own quiz on all these different areas, from sex to gender to weight to age, and you'll think you're a pretty good person going in, and you may not even invite yourself to dinner after you're done with the survey. Because we got baggage. One of the things that I did as part of the Army is they sent me to the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. It was a 3-week program in Florida. It's one of the leading programs in the country on what we were going through at the time concerning race relations and other issues in the Army. And so I went in there thinking, I've got this stuff pretty well figured out, and I've mastered the art of political correctness and all this stuff. And after about the first 3 days, you realize you're pretty bad inside. I mean, you got tapes and stuff running in there, experiences running in the deep background. This is stuff running on the computer that you're not really bringing up. It's just there. And so a lot of studies are going on now, and this questions of overt racism by our police or our military, or whether it's this implicit kind of thing that's going on deeply underneath that we all have to worry about, that we have to worry about as judges, that we have to worry about as lawyers, that we have to worry about as police officers, that we have to worry about in the military. So all of these things are going on that we want you to be aware of. As I look through the list of people that had served here, you understand this is just scratching the surface of the lawyers from this community that have served in many different capacities. A few years ago, we requested judges that had served in the military to make themselves known to us, and we had this huge poster made, of judges who had served in the military, and it's just amazing. And as you get the word out, you would have hundreds and thousands of lawyers that have served and served proudly. So I guess to kind of summarize it is, to say thank you is going to be more than just waving a flag on the 4th of July or on September 11th and saying thank you for your service. It's trying to understand what these people have really gone through. So for the last couple of minutes, I just want to talk to you a little bit about that. I had to deal with families that had lost service members. I had to deal with them as they were leaving, the tearful goodbyes, the trying to get ready, all of the problems that they were enduring, and then I had to deal with families that loved one was gone, that was experiencing every kind of problem you can imagine, and then I had to deal with the families of soldiers that were killed, and there were several Guard soldiers that were killed in either Iraq or Afghanistan. These are horrible things, but it's not just the ones that are dead. We have had over 8,000 soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan just since 2001. But more than that, we've had tens of thousands seriously wounded, amputations, every kind of horrible injury you can imagine. But the depression, the suicide rate, the other problems that these soldiers are experiencing because of the constant deployments that they're undergoing. When you only have a limited number of people and you're at war for 15 years, you're starting to have cycles of deployment one after the other. The family just gets a person back and gets them in some side of normalcy, and then they're keyed up for deployment again. And of course, the escape through drugs and alcohol, all of the other post-traumatic stress syndrome, traumatic brain injury. I mean, I can't overstate the seriousness of it for how many of the large percentage of these people that come back. So it's important that we have things like veterans courts. Veterans Court, you have a brochure on in your information. It's one of our specialty courts in Illinois. It's a very important program that we have. I was proud that at Christian County, where I'm from, has, as you notice, all of the courts up and running. Judge Paisley's doing an excellent job down there. But these veterans need to have a chance of keeping their record clean so that they can get employment. They need to have an opportunity to have their medical, physical, psychological issues dealt with. These are strict programs. These are not giveaway kind of programs that you're being easy on people to go into. They're very serious programs. And I'm happy to say the Veterans Administration, while they're dysfunctional in a lot of areas, have been pretty functional in the areas of helping our veterans courts to really function and to help these service members. I also, after 9/11, the Illinois State Bar Association Military Affairs Committee got a list of volunteers, of lawyers who are willing to help families, to help veterans, to help their families of veterans that are away, to help service members. And we got a huge response. And so that project is still ongoing. It's gone away from some of the deployment issues. Now our primary issues are reemployment issues, employment issues, family law issues. So we still need volunteers to help in that area. You might have noticed there was a small filing fee add-on for helping to develop a project for a statewide call-in service for veterans that are in need of legal services and their families that could be able to access legal help, pro bono legal help, low-cost legal help. So I hope that you'll consider serving in some capacity in those things. Well, I could talk about veterans and service members, law enforcement for a long time. There's that 3% that's there in the middle of the night that we don't want to think about needing, but there are service people tonight in over 100 countries that are on post. Some are going to be injured tonight. Some are going to be lonely tonight. Somebody's family is going to be hurting tonight. And to be able to sit here in a great country like this, and to be able to know that they're there and that they're there when we call, is really an important thing that I hope that we all reflect a little bit tonight on that and what we can do by way of appreciation. Closing, several years ago, Justice Fitzgerald apparently was working at some kind of place for homeless people, soup kitchen, and he was really touched because he learned that some of the people there were veterans that had served in the war. And it just really got to him. And so he decided that he needed to do something about it. And so he rallied the troops, if you remember, and we got volunteer lawyers from all over the state to represent veterans in their claims before the Veterans Administration. Our Veterans Administration in Illinois had a deplorable record at that time. It was justice delayed and or denied. And so we had training, we had programs, we had lawyers that were eager and ready and willing to help, like we usually are when the Supreme Court calls. But it was wonderful to see. It was a blessing to see. And to paraphrase what Justice Fitzgerald said that was very meaningful to me, was the last paragraph of Lincoln's second inaugural address. And I want you to go home and read it because it's as vivid today as it was when Lincoln gave it. You know, after 4 years of Civil War, we've had 15 years of war. We pick up the paper today and we still see terrorist attacks. We see evil in all of its forms, you know, all around us. And we see suffering veterans, suffering police officers and families and so forth through all of these situations. And so, to paraphrase the last paragraph, it said we need to bind up our wounds as a nation. We need to care for those that have served and for the survivors of those that have died. We need to, as a country, come together again in a way that glorifies the death and the sacrifice that all these people make every day. So, you know, that's my request here tonight, that we as lawyers spend our time as communicators in our community, informing people about the needs of the 2%. We personally take on the responsibility of doing what we can for that 2%. We promote things that are going to help our young people so that they can be prepared for life, have a good education, good nutrition, good fitness. Some of them be able to serve if called upon in one of these professions. And that we be appreciative, not only of all the people that we've honored here tonight, but all the people that have ever served. Thank you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.